Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode 27 of the Nurse Trauma Healing Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lorre Laws, and today we are going to be discussing, some sensitive topics around the public gaslighting and metaphorical flogging of nurses worldwide, including yours truly. This is a sensitive topic, and some radical views from the public will be shared to highlight the toxic and often dangerous public perceptions through which many nurses are being verbally, emotionally, and oftentimes physically assaulted. And just for the record, it is not okay. It's not okay that nurses are being gaslighted, shamed, and publicly humiliated in their roles. This is happening to me, and well, quite frankly, it might be happening to you. So I want to open with just sharing some examples of the disparaging remarks that are being posted on my healing content on social media. Now, I know this is all part of being in the public eye, and I'm certainly not taking it personal. But that said, it really got me thinking about the impact of the misinformation around health knowledge, health literacy, and and its impact on how it may be placing nurses, and other health professionals' safety at risk. So I'm going to drop screenshots of these comments, which were made in a public forum, and to give just a little context for our topic today, because as you all know, nurses have been the most trusted profession for 22 straight years. So there is some cognitive dissonance here that we need to unpack. All right, so the first comment from Maggie Quinn is, get rid of all the corrupt doctors and nurses who administered the poison knowingly to innocent people. They will be punished. Nor Gray says, they all knew. If they didn't, they shouldn't be in that profession. You could not administer anything without knowing the ingredients, but they took the money to administer the jab. Chris Hayes chimes in. These are all on different posts too. I have a lot of content, a lot of educational content out there, so it's not surprising, that I'm getting comments of all sorts. But it's concerning because I think it may be contributing to workplace violence that is upticking. Chris Hayes says, well, you do keep playing the Russian roulette with gene therapy. And Stan Smith says, all the nurses that are left in the system deserve what they get. They helped with the mass murder of free men and women of this world. So let's just take a moment to, first of all, clear that energy out of this container. Returning all that back, returning with light and love, blessing all of those who commented and made their public opinion known. And now let us just think about this in the context of nurse-specific traumatization and the ever-increasing violent conditions in which we are working. So to review, are we, practicing nurses are now mass murderers? And it begs the question, as I'm really unpacking and processing and examining the evidence surrounding public perception and workplace violence in the health professions, which there's a paucity of evidence, quite frankly. And then it's like, wait a minute. Is nursing the most trusted profession, or are we public enemy number one? And we have an oxymoron before us, among other things. Cognitive dissonance, all sorts of things come to mind, including blaming the victim, including gaslighting, right? And not by our colleagues this time, but by those that we serve. So let's unpack this a little bit in the context of the US Gallup poll, which is conducted every single year. And Gallup conducts a massive survey to determine America's most trusted profession. And nursing, as I said, has been ranked in the most trusted professions, number one, as the most trusted profession for 22 consecutive years. Now, in their most recent survey, which I will link in the show notes, the trustworthiness of public opinion for all professions dropped. And despite that, nursing still persists as the number one most trusted profession. So, and yet, despite nursing being a highly trusted, respected, and mission-critical profession, nurses are experiencing workplace violence every single day. I recently presented at the National League of Nurses conference in San Antonio, Texas. There were just over 200 nurses in attendance for my presentation. And I introduced the concept of nurse-specific traumatization and the varying classifications of that by surveying the nurses in the audience. So I reviewed with the audience, as I have done in this podcast many times, and I'm dropping a graphic in the show notes for everyone's reference. We kind of walked through the individual traumas that, by virtue of being human, we all endure. And then we talked about, the other classifications, the vicarious, the workplace violence, historical trauma, system-induced trauma, insufficient resource trauma, second victim trauma. All right, we talked about all of those. And so as relates to workplace violence, which is an avoidable form of nurse-specific traumatization, I asked 200 nurses to raise their hand if they, like me, had ever been hit, kicked, punched, bruised, battered, scratched, hair pulled, spat upon, or had bodily excrement thrown on them. All of those things have happened to me personally. And the nurses raised their hand. I was shocked. 95% of those attending this conference in my conference room had experienced one or more of those forms of physical violence in the workplace. 190 out of 200 nurses surveyed reported being hit, kicked, punched, bruised, battered, scratched, had their hair pulled, been spat upon, or had bodily excrement thrown on them. This is not okay. It's not okay. And I made a promise to those 200 nurses who attended my presentation. I promised to continue to do my part to bring awareness and healing to nurses worldwide who are being traumatized in their role, including workplace violence. I will not be silent, because silence allows violence. So riddle me this, and this is me talking to me as well as talking to everyone out there. How can it be that the nation's most trusted profession is being met with such violence? Well, I started investigating, and I came across an article published by the American Nurses Association. And it's called the ANA, ENA, and ACEP Sound the Alarm on Violence Against Nurses article. And I have linked that in the show notes for you. And I'm going to quote here a few excerpts from that article, which goes on to say that they're highlighting the need for passage of legislation designed to mitigate the frequency and severity of workplace violence in healthcare. During a briefing for congressional staffers, the leaders of 3 organizations used data and storytelling to build an understanding of the impact of this ongoing crisis on healthcare workers and patients, a situation that is particularly dire in emergency departments, which serve as the healthcare safety net and are open 24/7. Among the data that was highlighted in this report was this: the rate of serious injuries related to workplace violence is 6 times higher for hospital workers compared to all other private sector employees in the United States. According to the American Nurses Association, out of all nurses who experience workplace violence, as many as 80% of cases go unreported. Of the nearly 500 members who responded to an ENA survey this year, 56% said that they had either been verbally assaulted, threatened with violence, or physically assaulted in the previous 30 days. A Press Ganey analysis found that 2 nurses are assaulted every hour. Every hour. In the time that you and I are gathering right now, as you're listening to this podcast, 2 nurses are being assaulted right now. I'm just devastated, quite frankly. And that's why I'm here. I'm going to do my part. So it goes on to state, the leaders also discussed the importance of 2 pending bills in Congress, and those are the Workplace Violence Prevention for Healthcare and Social Service Workers Act, and the second one is the Safety from Violence for Healthcare Employees Act, that respectively would bolster workplace violence mitigation efforts and make it a federal crime to assault a hospital employee. And now I'm going to quote ANA President Jennifer Menzick Kennedy, who states that violence against healthcare professionals, the very people who are entrusted to care for the sick and encourage the healing, is absolutely unacceptable and reprehensible. Passage of federal legislation to protect our nurses and other healthcare workers and keep them safe is something that the American Nurses Association will never stop advocating for and is long overdue. Dr. Kennedy goes on to state it is the employer's responsibility to ensure workplace safety and security. But sadly, in many healthcare settings, nurses are still experiencing violence at alarming rates, 2 per hour. Too many of my fellow nurses' lives, Dr. Kennedy goes on to say, have already been lost to workplace violence. We need to act now to break this deadly cycle of violence against healthcare professionals, and these bills that we currently are supporting in Congress is a step in that direction. And now I'm going to quote Dr. Aisha Terry, the ACEP president, who said, "We are vulnerable to threats and violence, and we are encouraged by those who join our call for stronger protections. Fortunately, these bills can help protect healthcare workers on the job and take important steps to prevent incidents from happening in the first place." Well, okay, so I'm reflecting now on my own 200 nurses that I surveyed, and 190 of the 200 raised their hand when asked about their work violence history, because they were in a safe, relatively anonymous space the 56% of whom who likely reported those violent acts against them, plus the 80% who did not report them, were all able to be seen, nurtured, and provided through my work with mission critical resources to aid in their healing process. So, how is it that nurses are being gaslighted and verbally mistreated despite being the most trusted profession? Well, as I reflected on the myriad of factors contributing to nurse workplace violence, which I've linked this study in the show notes for you, I reflected on these factors, which are in two kind of overarching domains. The first is that, of course, we have some unpredictable behaviors of patients and their families who are understandably under emotional stress, as well as organizational and systemic factors, such as high stress work environments, staff shortages, lack of organizational policies and staff training, overcrowding, long wait times, inflexible visiting hours, lack of information, and the list goes on. It became clear to me that workplace violence is largely an avoidable form of nurse-specific traumatization that is due to our broken healthcare system and organizational shortcomings. But there's another factor that no one is really talking about, and it's one that I'm experiencing firsthand, is not only are we getting all of this in our roles, but we are also experiencing blame, shame, and gaslighting in the public sector for everything and anything connected to the events of 2020, 2021. I never saw or experienced blaming, shaming, gaslighting, and verbal mistreatment until I started bringing my research to the public forum. Now, again, I know it comes with being in the public eye, and I am not taking it personal, but I am a nurse scientist, and it is my job to try and ask big questions and answer them using the evidence. And so here I am, just one nurse standing up and doing my part to address a global nursing crisis and help my colleagues to heal from all that they've endured and protect themselves from the impacts of the broken healthcare system. Now, admittedly, as a reluctant, a very reluctant public figure, I have been shocked to experience the public shaming for everything and anything connected to a global pandemic. And after doing a kind of an informal thematic analysis, I'm a qualitative researcher, so words are my thing. And I took a deep dive looking at the nature of the comments that a segment of the public sector are proclamating. Well, three themes emerged. And these themes are framed in untruths. So this is untruth. Number one, nurses deserve to suffer. That was the first big theme. A portion of the public sector is happy that nurses are burned out and outright traumatized. Their perspective is that nurses deserve it because we didn't stand up during the pandemic. It's our fault that there's controversy. It's our fault that there was death. And it's our fault that public policies that we're bound to, that require us to enforce to keep our license. And so we deserve to suffer for global events that are clearly out of our control. It's another form of blaming the victim. You know, it's a toxic cultural trait. Untruth number 2, which is also theme number 2 that emerged from my thematic analysis, scouring hundreds of, oh, more than hundreds, thousands of public comments on the topic of nurses in all of social media outlets, news outlets of all forms, is that the nurses are to blame and they should be shamed. That was the second theme. I personally have been told, shame on you, like literally shaming me personally at least 50 times in public forums for bringing awareness and healing to nurse-specific trauma. Quote, you, all the nurses, get what you deserve. You reap what you sow. These are actual quotes. You made your bed, now you have to lay in it. These are frequent gaslighting themes that I encountered, as if any one of us, you or me, could have done a darn thing about a global pandemic. As if we had that power. Because if we had that power, we would not be in the situation that we're in, because nurses know how to fix this stuff. We don't have the power to do so. Not yet. And that's part of why I'm here, because we can't empower ourselves while we have gaping wounds. Only from our healing scars can we rise together. All right, and then here's the third theme, which I'm presenting as untruth number 3. Nurses should just suck it up, buttercup. I cannot even count how many times people commented in public forums that nurses should just suck it up. If you get hit or assaulted at work, well, then it must be your fault. If you're unsigned to an unsafe number of patients, then it's your job to deal with it. How is it that nurses, the literal linchpins of any health system, are being subjected to a blame the victim public persecution? Like, how can this be? And it's really, in short, a segment. I mean, this is, let's not generalize this to be a universal truth, but a segment of and it's a large segment of the general population, is engaging in a culture of blame, engaging in often violent and blame the victim behaviors and outright gaslighting, all of which constitute yet another layer of nurse-specific trauma exposure and traumatization. While there are a plethora of research studies examining nurse workplace violence, none of the studies that I reviewed examined the impact of misinformation regarding the nurse's role during the pandemic and its impact upon increased rates of workplace violence, or the 7-point drop in the Gallup poll regarding our trustworthiness as a profession. Anecdotally speaking, I can attest to the verbal mistreatment of nurses regarding their alleged role and their alleged involvement in and responsible for a global pandemic. Again, an untruth. Again, misinformation. Clearly, segments of the general population do not understand what the nursing profession and nurses actually do, how nurses are licensed, our scope of practice, nor how utterly disempowered most of us are in our roles, secondary to systemic and historical oppression of nurses over the past 2 centuries and more. Well, I don't have the answer to how public perception of nurses and their role contributes to the uptick of workplace violence in the wake of the pandemic. But what I do know is that this workplace violence is a global epidemic. I do know that and have experienced that the blaming, the shaming, and all the incivilities, it's yet another layer of nurse-specific traumatization, this time being inflicted by a segment of the general population. I mean, that's a big number. That's a big number. And how is that influencing the uptick of violence in the workplace? I don't know, but some of my colleagues out there, if you're writing grants, let me just shine a spotlight where future research is needed. So it's time for us to bring this episode to a close. And I just want to say, if you're curious to learn more, please consider purchasing my upcoming book that discusses these topics while offering a 4-step evidence-based pathway to healing and full recovery, and also strategies to insulate yourself from the effects of all the trauma exposure. It's time. It's time. It's been time. I've been in and out of this profession for 50 years. Yeah, well, no, almost 50 years, 45 anyway. And it's time to end all of this. And it's time to enter a new paradigm of nursing 2.0, the nurse safety and professional well-being edition. So please consider just going to my website, drlorrelaws.com, and you'll find there a link to Nursing Our Healer's Heart, which is available in bookstores wherever books are sold worldwide. So you can either get links on my website or just search for the title, Nursing Our Healer's Heart, and you'll see behind me what the book cover looks like. And if you or someone you know has been affected by nurse-specific traumatization, please seek support immediately. I and my team are standing by to help you through my nonprofit organization, however possible. And also I'll drop the links to my nurse trauma masterclass and also my calendar where you can schedule a private call with me. I am here for you. Until next time, thank you. Thank you for all that you are. Thank you for all that you do. I see you. I feel you. I hear you. And I am here for you. From my healer's heart to yours. Namaste.